All right, so you know how everyone's always wondering about cell phones and, like, if they cause cancer?
Yeah,
Well, this excerpt you sent in from Cell Phones and Cancer Risk. Examining the evidence is, like, exactly what we need to figure this out.
definitely this article lays it all out there.
So we're going deep to see if there's actually, like, a real threat, and a good place to start is that the WHO classified cell phone radiation as possibly carcinogenic.
Right, and that's enough to get people thinking about it.
For sure, but it doesn't automatically mean that cell phones cause cancer.
No, not at all, but it does mean that it's worth looking into more closely.
Exactly, and I think it's interesting that one study actually blasted rats with cell phone radiation, which seems kind of wild.
Yeah,
But before we get into that, can you remind me what type of radiation we're dealing with here?
sure. So cell phones give off non-ionizing radiation, and
Yeah.
unlike ionizing radiation, like what you get with X-rays, this doesn't have enough energy to, like, break apart your DNA directly.
So that's good news, right?
Yeah, I mean, that means it's not like getting a mini X-ray every time you make a call.
Phew, that's a relief. But the question is, could this type of radiation still mess with us, especially over a long time?
That's exactly what researchers are trying to figure out.
That makes sense. So where do we even begin with this investigation?
Well, I think we have to start with the Interphone study, which is like the biggest study on this topic. They looked at data from 13 countries and didn't find a clear link between cell phone use and cancer for most people.
That's reassuring, right?
It is, but here's the thing. They did find a possible increase in glioma, which is a type of brain tumor, but only in the heaviest users,
How heavy are we talking?
like over 1,640 hours of talk time.
Wow, 1,640 hours. That's like talking for 2.5 months straight, no breaks. I don't know anyone who talks that much.
Yeah, most people don't even come close to that, but it does suggest that the amount you use your phone might play a role.
Okay, so it's not super clear cut. What about other studies? Did they find similar results?
It's a mixed bag. Some did, some didn't. And that's what makes this research so tricky. There are so many things that can cause cancer. It's hard to isolate cell phone use.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Exactly.
Speaking of haystacks, what about that rat study you mentioned earlier, the one where they blasted them with radiation?
Oh, the National Toxicology Program study.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did find more tumors in the hearts of male rats, and that definitely got people's attention.
Yeah, that makes sense. But wait, didn't you say that cell phone radiation can't break apart DNA? So how did the rats get tumors?
That's a good question, and this is where it gets even more complicated. Remember, those rats were exposed to a crazy amount of radiation, much more than any normal person would ever get from their phone.
So basically, unless I'm sleeping with my phone glued to my head, I'm probably okay.
Pretty much, it's all about perspective. And to add to that, some large-scale studies like the Danish cohort study and the Million Women study didn't find any connection between cell phone use and brain tumors.
So some studies say there's a possible risk and others say no risk. It's kind of confusing.
Yeah, it definitely shows we need more research, but it also reminds us to look at the bigger picture. We know that cell phone radiation does interact with our bodies somehow, even though it's non-ionizing.
So how could something that doesn't break apart DNA potentially cause problems?
But that's the million-dollar question, and the article talks about some interesting theories. One is that the radiation heats up your tissues, but cell phones don't actually generate enough heat to be a concern.
Okay, so it's not like we're getting cooked by our phones. What are some of the other theories?
Another theory is oxidative stress, which means that EMFs could potentially increase free radical production, and that can lead to cell damage over time. It's kind of like rust forming on a car. It happens slowly, but eventually it can cause damage.
That makes sense. What else?
There's also research looking into whether radio frequency radiation could mess with the blood-brain barrier. And if that happens, harmful substances could get into the brain.
So even if the radiation itself isn't directly harming DNA, it could be weakening our body's defenses.
Exactly. And then there's the idea that RF exposure might directly damage DNA, but that's still up for debate in the scientific community.
Okay, my brain is starting to hurt. Can we maybe move on to what all of this means for us, practically speaking?
Sure, it's easy to get lost in all the science, but at the end of the day, it's about how you can feel more comfortable using your cell phone.
Okay, so knowing all this, is there anything we should actually be doing differently, or are we all just like guinea pigs in a huge cell phone experiment?
I wouldn't go that far, but we're definitely still learning a lot. The good news is you don't have to be afraid of your phone. There are simple things you can do to reduce any possible risks.
Okay, tell me everything. What can I do to protect myself?
Well, first off, using a wired headset or speakerphone is a good way to keep your phone away from your head, and that reduces direct exposure.
I already do that a lot, especially when I'm working from home. What else?
Texting is your friend. Try to text instead of calling whenever you can, and when you do have to call, keep it short. No more marathon phone calls with your best friend.
I'm totally guilty of those. But okay, short and sweet it is.
Another good tip is to avoid using your phone in areas with a weak signal. When your phone has trouble connecting, it actually gives off more radiation.
Oh wow, I usually just get annoyed when my signal drops. But now I have another reason to find a better spot.
And of course, when you don't need to be connected, like when you're sleeping, just switch your phone to airplane mode that gets rid of all RF radiation emissions.
Airplane mode, it's like a digital detox for your brain, but what about during the day? I usually just throw my phone in my pocket or bag. Is that okay?
It's generally a good idea to not carry your phone right up against your body for a long time. Maybe try keeping it in a bag or a purse instead.
Okay, that makes sense. I've also heard about those phone cases that say they block radiation. Do they actually work?
Well, they're out there, and some people really believe in them, but there's not a lot of evidence to back up those claims.
So buyer beware.
Exactly. It's always a good idea to be a little skeptical of those kinds of products and do your own research.
All right, I'm feeling a little more in control now. Instead of freaking out about my phone, I can just focus on these simple things to lower my risk.
That's the right attitude. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about this, the better you can make decisions that feel right for you.
I love that, informed decisions. So what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
I think it's this: you don't need to get rid of your phone completely, but it's smart to be aware of the potential risks and take some precautions.
Totally. It's all about finding that balance.
Exactly. And this is just the beginning. The research on cell phones and health is always changing, so it's good to stay updated.
Speaking of more to learn, the article mentioned that most research focuses on brain tumors, but there's also talk about other possible health effects from EMF exposure.
Right. Some scientists are looking into whether EMF radiation could be linked to things like trouble sleeping, fertility problems, and even heart issues.
Wait, so it's not just about cancer. This deep dive just got a lot deeper.
It definitely shows that we need to look at the bigger picture. We're exposed to EMFs all the time, not just from our phones, but from Wi-Fi routers, power lines, appliances. Even the Earth itself gives off EMFs.
It's like we're swimming in a sea of EMFs.
And as technology keeps advancing, we're only going to be exposed to more, so understanding how EMFs affect our health is super important.
I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed again, but I also want to learn more. It's like a good mystery. I need to know what happens.
It's definitely a fascinating area of research, and there's still so many questions we don't have answers to.
Exactly. The unknown can be a little scary, but it's also what leads to new discoveries.
Well said. And while it's easy to focus on the negative stuff, it's important to remember that EMFs are also essential for life. Our bodies use electromagnetic signals for all sorts of things, like cell communication, nerve impulses, and heart function.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. So EMFs are both good and bad.
That's a great way to put it. It's a complicated relationship. And the key is finding the right balance we need to use the benefits of electromagnetic technology, but also be aware of the possible risks.
So what can we do besides the things you already mentioned about cell phones? How can we handle this increasingly complex world of EMFs?
Well, one thing we can do is support research in this area. The more we understand about how EMFs affect our bodies, the better decisions we can make.
Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely. And we can also encourage companies to develop technology responsibly, making sure they prioritize safety and are open about EMF emissions.
Yeah, we don't want to be afraid of technology, but we should also make sure companies are making it safe to use.
Exactly. And on a personal level, we can be mindful of how much we're exposed to EMFs. We talked about reducing cell phone radiation. But we can also do things like using a wired internet connection instead of Wi-Fi, keeping electrical appliances away from our beds, and just being aware of the EMFs in our homes and workplaces.
So it's all about being informed, making good choices, and pushing for responsible technology.
That's a great summary.
Well, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to a whole new world. It's a lot to process, but I feel more empowered now.
That's what we're here for, to help you understand complicated topics and make good choices about your health.
And speaking of good choices, you mentioned that the article has links for more information. We'll be sure to include those in the show notes so our listeners can keep learning.
That's great. There's so much information out there, and it's constantly changing.
And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into cell phones and cancer. It's been quite a journey, but I think we've learned some important things.
Definitely. We've explored the science, the studies, the theories, and even the bigger picture of EMF exposure in our lives.
This deep dive has really made me realize how much we still don't know about this topic.
And that's what's so cool about science. It's always evolving. As we do more research, we'll understand more and more.
So true. And for those of you who want to learn more, you can find those links from the article in the show notes.
Definitely stay curious and keep learning.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, stay curious. Okay, so we've talked about steps we can take now and like what the future of EMF research might look like. But are we supposed to actually be worried?
I mean, I know it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, because we have the WHO saying possibly carcinogenic. And then those rat studies where they got tumors, it's kind of scary.
It can definitely seem that way. But remember, those rat studies use super high levels of radiation, way more than what we get from using our phones normally.
Right.
And that possibly carcinogenic classification, well, it's based on pretty limited evidence, so it doesn't automatically mean that cell phones cause cancer. It just means we need more research.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better.
And honestly, unless you're like living inside a microwave, you're probably not getting that level of exposure.
Definitely not. So I guess I don't need to throw away my phone or anything.
Not at all. It's really about making informed choices. And we've gone over some good ways to lower your exposure, like using a headset, texting, instead of calling and keeping your phone away from your body.
Yeah, those are all good ideas.
If you're concerned, those small changes can make a difference.
I like that you said informed choices. It's not about being scared. It's about understanding the risks and being smart about it.
Exactly. We want to give you the knowledge so you can make the best choices for yourself.
So this has been our deep dive into cell phones and cancer. A lot to think about, for sure.
We've covered a lot, like the science behind it, the different studies and theories, and even how EMFs are everywhere in our lives.
I've definitely learned a lot about how much we're still figuring out about this whole topic.
Yeah, and that's what's so exciting about science. It's always changing. And as we learn more, our understanding will get better and better.
And for anyone who wants to keep learning, you can find those links from the article in our show notes.
Definitely check those out.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been great talking about this with you.
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.